Nations Climate Change Conference, COP27, closed in November with a breakthrough agreement to provide loss and damage funding for vulnerable countries hit hard by climate disasters. COP27 also saw India laying out its low emissions growth plan for the long term with the help of innovative initiatives in e mobility, renewable energy, green hydrogen, and also ethanol blended fuels. So clearly, a phased transition is on the cards to attain the net zero emission goal by 2070, as was pledged at the COP26. But to enable this transition and transformation, SEBI has also recently introduced the BRSR framework, as per which the top 1,000 listed companies must report all information related to ESG each and every year. So, evidently, sustainability is in sharp focus currently, and ESG will be acting as a very serious metric for measuring the contribution of corporates towards India's net zero journey. So, industry leaders need to collect and analyze relevant data more strategically and accurately in order to achieve sustainability goals. So, here at this very special event, we have leaders from key sectors who have gathered here to deliberate on effective decarbonization strategies and the role of emerging technologies like cloud to achieve these goals. So, to explore how sustainability can be achieved in an era of innovations, we have with us a very special panel here. And let me begin by introducing them. So, first of all, we have with us Mr. Sundar Ram, Director of Business Development, AWS India. We also have Mr. Arun Kumar Parmeshwaran, Senior VP and MD at Salesforce.
Hi, good afternoon.
Ms. Vaishali Nigam Sinha, Co-founder and Chair Sustainability Renew Power. Mr. Anirban Ghosh, Head Center for Sustainability at Mahindra University. Mr. Ramnath Vedyanathan, Associate Vice President and Head Sustainability, Godrej Industries and Associate Companies. And we have Ms. Rinika Grover, Head Sustainability and CSR at Apollo Tyres Limited. So welcome to the show and thank you all so much for joining in.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us here.
Great. So I'd like to begin with you, Mr. Arun. Earlier this year, you officially announced sustainability as a very core value for your company. So how are you at Salesforce ensuring that it is integrated with each and every level and aspect of the company vision?
Thank you, and I appreciate having an opportunity to be here on this panel. The good news is, as of 2021, officially, we're a net zero company across Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. We firmly believe that companies need to embed sustainability and the broader ESG goals into the core of the business. It can't be something that's standalone. And so, if you think about Salesforce, we decided to make sustainability one of our core values because we believe that we have to operationalize this value and we have to make sure that we're clear about the commitments that we are making, and we have to be clear about how we're going to achieve those commitments, right? And so the whole concept of measuring, tracking, and delivering to our commitments to our stakeholders. Our sustainability vision is to leverage the full power of Salesforce to accelerate the world towards net zero. We're not happy just that we're net zero. We want to see if we can use the lessons that we've learned along the way to make sure that we can help our customers and our stakeholders in that journey, lead towards a nature positive movement, and more importantly, energize the ecopreneur revolution, if you will. And so those are some of the key reasons why we decided that we should make it a core value. And one of the reasons, also that gave us the confidence. Look, at the end of the day, our superpower is software, right? So we've released Net Zero Cloud to the world. Essentially, this was the software that we used to track our emissions and our actions that allowed us to become a net zero company. And in the process, we had a number of customers that said, look, we need that as well, right? It's quite complicated. We need to have, a reliable way in which we can analyze, we can take actions that can accelerate our journey towards net zero, helps us in audits, the financial filings, all of that, right? And so that was amongst one of the most important reasons why we released Net Zero Cloud for our customers, so they can then take advantage of all the lessons we learned in our journey towards being a net zero company. And that's essentially where, we started this year by saying, okay, now this is a core value. One of the things about the company is we only put something into our core values that we know we can operationalize, that we can track, that we can measure, and deliver to our commitments.
Sure. Thank you for sharing that. And I'd like to come to you, Mr. Ramnath. Last year, Godrej Properties was ranked first among the listed global residential developers by Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark. So, could you tell us a little bit more about your sustainability goals as a company and how far have you achieved them?
Yeah, thank you for that. In terms of for properties in particular, I think one of the biggest learnings has been that the emissions and the larger environmental impact lies outside the ambit of our operations. I think that's been one of the major areas of focus for us. At a group level, we've taken a commitment. So all four companies, which is consumer products, agrovet, chemicals, as well as properties, have all committed to their science-based targets for scope one, scope two, and scope three, as is compulsory. And we've submitted our targets for validation. And for college properties, evidently it's scope three where we need to make the biggest impact because most of our emissions happens at the contractors and outside of our direct operations. So one of the things that we are actively looking at, and this is a major focus for the next 5 years, apart from, of course, leading our own operations, is actually supply
Mhm.
chain engagement. And how do
All
we
right.
really incentivize our suppliers to reduce their own environmental impact? Of course, it's easier
Absolutely.
said than done because currently it's in its infancy in the sense that it's more of knowledge sharing and it's more in terms of best practices rather than any sort of punitive or incentive mechanism, which will eventually be the long-term objective of this. But for the starting point, we've actually set up an EMS system which covers all of our suppliers now, in terms of properties at least, and which now gets regular information on each of our project sites in terms of the fuel usage, the water usage, the waste production, how much of it is recycled. Apart from this, we are also doing a study with academia to understand the actual fate of construction material, to really understand how much circularity we can bring within the system. On a third front, we are also working extensively, mainly with cement and steel suppliers, which form a bulk of our raw material. And also from an emissions standpoint, these are the highest contributing emissions to our scope three. We are working with them to establish some sort of a system where data on emissions can be freely shared. And in terms of not just reporting, but also looking at reduction mechanisms. So
All
these
right.
are some of the major areas of focus for us over the next 5 years.
Mhm.
And the last area of focus, which is possibly the most complicated one, is actually influencing customer behavior.
Correct.
Because the property sector is one of the most, I would say, advanced in terms of defining what green products are.
Mhm.
You very clearly have definition of what is a green building, what's a platinum building, what's a silver building, what's a gold building.
Absolutely.
But we are not really tracking whether these buildings are being utilized and how they were designed to be. In terms of during the use phase, what are the data we're getting out of it? That's something we're working on right now. So these are just some of the initiatives we're taking on the properties business, which are, of course, linked to the strategy of the overall group in terms of what we want to achieve over the next 5 to 10 years in terms of sustainability.
Great. Thank you for taking us through the roadmap ahead of Godrej, Mr. Ramnath. I'd like to bring you in, Ms. Vishali. Renew also as a company is committed to achieve the net zero goal by the year 2040. So, according to you, what are the key pillars that will be driving the success of your sustainability mission?
Sure. Hi. Thanks, Ruchira, and thank you for having me amongst your august guests. It's a pleasure to be here. And also, thank you for discussing this very important topic. We at Renew have committed to net zero by 2040, which is important. But more important is how are we going to get there? And so, for that, we have identified a roadmap and we have a six pillar approach towards getting to our net zero goals.
Sure.
One is by setting up a strong governance system. So at Renew, we have a board level ESG committee. We have a steering committee at the management committee level. And at the site level, we have a working group committee. So we believe it's important for us to be able to integrate the governance right from the board all the way to the sites. We
Mhm.
also believe that it is very important that we can map and integrate sustainability into our day to day operations, for which, and that is both across the value chain, upstream and downstream. So, we have done a complete study to identify the key material issues which are required for us to mitigate and to come up with a plan, and we review it every month with the core members of that team. We are also looking at building a culture of sustainability. So, a lot is being said about sustainability. It's a buzzword. And, I think more what we believe at Renew is that it's about how we think and what is the mindset in the company, which will act as an enabler for us to be able to achieve the goals we've set for ourselves. Because if that's not well understood and well implemented, I don't think we'll be able to get there, whether it is as a company or whether it is as a country or globally. So, culture building is a very important part of what we are doing. Also, how do we communicate it to key stakeholders is crucial.
Absolutely.
So we have, kind of, we are getting ourselves validated from SBTI. We are targeting disclosures like GRI, TCFD, and SASB. So, pretty global. We're also targeting high quality ratings.
Mm,
So, like CDP and Sustainalytics, etc. But as I said, overarching focus is really to build the culture in our organization, and then
sure.
also to set these targets which will help us become better as an organization. And not only us, but we go beyond our organization. We are looking at our supply chain, and we've also broken down our targets into annual,
All right.
3 year, 5 year, and 2030 and then 2040 targets. So we have a
Sure.
digital dashboard which helps us monitor our journey across the
Mm,
environment, social, and governance area. So these are some of the ways in which we are working on doing better, and just ensuring we are monitoring what we are doing, year on year, and perhaps even quarter on quarter,
all right.
month on month, and every day.
All right. Very important points made by you. Culture building and, of course, communicating goals clearly to all the key stakeholders will go a long way. I'd like to bring you in, Mr. Anirban. The Mahindra Group has also been aiming to, achieve carbon neutrality by the year 2040. So, could you tell us about the key planet-friendly practices that you have been adopting as a company, and how much have you really managed to achieve till date?
Thank you, Ruchira, for that question. The Mahindra Group started this journey about 15 years ago. It's been a process of discovery, and a whole lot of milestones have happened along the way. So let me address the second part of your question first. The
Sure.
first, India's first carbon neutral factory is one of the factories in the Mahindra Group. Our construction business has just launched India's first net zero energy residential building. There's a whole list of firsts because we got started 15 years earlier, and a lot of traction has been achieved. The work started with a lot of energy efficiency projects, and
All
very
right.
soon we were the first in the world to commit to doubling energy productivity by joining the EP100 program. I'm happy to tell you that one of our factories doubled energy productivity in 4 years' time when we were given 25 years to do so. It just shows that the opportunity out there is very high. We can all progress very, very quickly. Our methods of governance is pretty much the same as what you've heard in this conversation, so I will not repeat it. But we understand that there are two broad areas in which businesses make impact. First broad area is within the boundaries. So you decarbonize, you work on water, you become water secure, you use less energy to use water, you work on biodiversity, you ensure that waste does not lead to emissions. And 25 of our locations are now certified as zero waste to landfill. But the biggest thing all businesses do or will do will provide is about providing climate solutions to customers and to the wider world. For us, electric vehicles, green buildings, green resorts all fall in this space. You've already heard solutions in IT. There's Renew Power with solar energy. We have a solar energy business too. So, all of us will provide green solutions for the wider world to decarbonize at scale. And the extent to which we can decarbonize within our businesses is actually quite small compared to the impact we will have outside our businesses through green solutions. So that's our approach. We define it by saying build enduring business
All right.
while rejuvenating the planet and enabling stakeholders to rise. And everything I've told you guys is kind of enveloped by this one statement.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for taking us through those, goals that you have set for yourself. Coming to you, Ms. Renika, tell us about the sustainable material partnership that you've recently entered into, and how does that contribute to your aim of achieving the net zero goal by the year 2050?
Sure, Richard. Greetings to everyone, and thank you for providing Apollo Tires an opportunity. I just talk about in terms of when we're talking about net zero. When we talk about net zero, it talks about emissions not emitting from within the manufacturing locations, but outside of the manufacturing locations as well, which is termed as scope 3 emissions or the value chain emissions. Now, when we talk about Apollo's journey overall, I mean, we have embarked upon this a while ago, about a few years ago, and we've committed ourselves to be carbon neutral by 2050 because of our plants being in Europe region as well. So we've kind of aligned it with the overall European Green Deal. But now we have also started to take some smaller steps in terms of what it looks like by 2026. That's from 5 years from now, what the vision should look like for us. And there we've started to peg some kind of smaller goals as well, where we're looking at emissions from manufacturing locations. How do we achieve those? But when we talk about scope 3 emissions or value chain emissions, that's a bigger piece. It's the elephant in the room, which needs to be addressed as well in terms of reaching the overall end target. As an organization, we've made a commitment to have 40% of our sustainable raw materials by 2030. But there is a background work in terms of how do we achieve and why do we need to do that. So when we look at the entire tire manufacturing process, one needs to be mindful that the maximum emissions are emitted in the use phase of a tire, which with the acceleration or the explosive growth of EV would somewhere be taken care of. The other big piece of for us is the raw material side, where we need to look at the production. So of course, we are working with our supply chain partners. There is a sustainable procurement policy where we are trying to ensure that the ESG indicators that we have within the organizations are cascaded to our supply chain partners as well. Some of the key areas, what we've started to look at now is in terms of the sustainable raw materials. So for instance, when we look at the raw materials, the synthetic rubber, which we use, it's got these polymers that are produced. They basically use some kind of fossil fuel to produce those polymers as well. So one thing we've started to take upon is how we can move and how we can take the natural inputs to create those polymers so that it moves toward a sustainable raw material journey. The one key partnership, Ruchira, that I'd like to highlight is this partnership with a Canadian-based organization, Tyromer, where we are looking to devulcanize rubber in a non-chemical manner so that the rubber that's devulcanized, we can actually look at using in our own product mix. Whilst we're doing that, of course, it increases this and it accelerates our journey towards sustainable raw material. But it also embraces the circular economy piece, which the whole world is talking about. So that's one key area we've recently started to work on, and that's about it.
All right. Thank you for taking us through the roadmap ahead of you. I'd like to bring you in, Mr. Sundaram. What you are doing at AWS, if you could share the strategies that you have deployed to make the infrastructure and operations more sustainable, and how do you intend to achieve Amazon's net zero goals by the year 2040?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for this question, and thanks for my co-panelists for joining us. Whatever AWS does, it has to be seen in the larger context of what Amazon as a global corporation does. And as you know, Amazon being the size of organization that we are, we do have a commitment to help not just for Amazon and its operations, but also to the wider community around. So in that sense, I think 2 or 3 things, right? So first is I want to touch upon what does Amazon do and how does AWS support that? And then how do we take that to the broader community? So in terms of what Amazon does itself, I think we started by having a very high level commitment which then energizes the entire organization. So, for example, we have committed to be carbon neutral by 2040, which will be 10 years in advance of the global 2050 pledge. Likewise, on our water consumption, we've committed that AWS will be water neutral. In fact, will be supplying more water back to the communities than we take by 2030. And in fact, we had a commitment that all our transportation would be 100% renewable by 2030. And now we are trying to pull that date forward to 2025. So that's number one. So having these really big, hairy, audacious goals, which energize the organization, that's important. And then I think, a couple of the other panelists touched upon this, which is having the governance and then the tracking to ensure that we are actually tracking to those. So we rigorously follow up on that. So, for example, in terms of using renewable energy, we are already at 85% across all of our businesses. We've made significant progress, for example, on water. We are already recycling 96% of the water we use and so on. So that is from a broader Amazon perspective. Now, in terms of how AWS supports that, I think 2 or 3 things. So one is, what is AWS doing to reduce its own carbon footprint, and how does that then play out to the rest of the world? So those are the second and the third parts I wanted to talk about. So in terms of our own data center and our own operations, they will be again 100% renewable energy by 2025. That's number one. And number two, we have introduced our own chipsets, which called Graviton, which take up to about 60% lesser energy compared to other chipsets for the same level of workload. And all our new construction is done with low carbon concrete and so on, so that we are lowering the carbon consumption, not just in the consumption that's happening of power and so on inside, but in the overall building infrastructure, etc. And the third part, which I wanted to mention, was how do we take our learnings out to the rest of the world? And again, I want to split that into 2 parts, what we do through Amazon and specifically what we do through AWS. Within Amazon, we have the Climate Pledge, which a number of organizations, including a few Indian organizations, are signatories to, which is currently nearly 400 of these, where we have taken pledges in terms of how we are going to contribute to the green economy. And we have also now put serious funding behind that. So we have a $2 billion climate fund, which is meant to help startups and smaller companies which are developing sustainable solutions, whether it be in transportation, whether it be in cooling, whether it be in circular economy, whether it be in agriculture and food processing to minimize wastage and so on. So that is one aspect of it. And in terms of how AWS takes these learnings to others, what we are doing is that we are helping organizations to track how much they're able to save on their carbon footprint by migrating to the cloud, and what would be the benefits of doing so, being able to see that on their console itself, and also in terms of the solutions that are built on top of AWS, which then help customers to lower their energy consumption. So, for example, we work with startups in the agri space, which are helping customers to reduce the amount of water that they need to use by having sensors which are in the soil in each and every farm. We are also working with, for example, battery manufacturers which are connected to solar power to help them simulate different working conditions so that the development time for the battery can be reduced from a few years down to a few months. So these are some of the interesting ways in which we are helping. So to kind of summarize that in 3 parts, what is Amazon doing in terms of the goals, the tracking, etc. That's 1. 2, in terms of how does AWS support these specific goals, and 3, in terms of how we then share these learnings with the rest of the world, be it through the Climate Pledge or through AWS. So yeah.
All right. Thank you for sharing those insights there. I'd like to bring you in at this point, Mr. Arun Kumar. Do you think SEBI's recent ESG-related guidelines on mandatory reporting will actually encourage organizations across the country to pursue sustainability a lot more seriously? And if so, then how?
Look, I think, we firmly believe in the whole concept of stakeholder capitalism. And I think the biggest stakeholder for all of us is the planet, right? And if you don't include the planet as a stakeholder, then why are we here? So we foundationally believe that what SEBI is doing is good. But, at the end of the day, it all comes down to how you're set up as an organization. What are the commitments that you're willing to make as a board, to your stakeholders, and how are you then tracking, how are you managing to those goals, right? And I think making those commitments publicly, and a number of the panelists have talked about some really bold commitments that these amazing organizations have made, right? And so it's extremely crucial. Like, for example, on our side, we've said, we'll reduce emissions for scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, continue to reduce it 50% by 2030, and 90% by 2040, with 2018 as a baseline, right? So we've got specific measures targeted on how we'll achieve those kind of metrics, if you will. And then, of course, the other thing I forgot to mention, we've also launched the net zero marketplace, right? So where you do have these remaining emissions, you then have the ability to go in and purchase these credits to offset the emissions that you're going to continue to have, so that you can accelerate your journey towards net zero, right? And therefore, funding and supercharging that whole ecopreneur revolution, if you will. So our belief is that, what SEBI is doing is good. I think what will ultimately come down to organizations in terms of how they're willing to put a stake in the ground. Like you said, we're net zero today, right? And we put a stake in the ground and said, it's not just enough that, the easy thing for us to do is say we're net zero and we're done. But we're saying it's not just enough for us to be net zero. We need to figure out how we can grab the broader community of stakeholders along with us. That includes everybody from our customers, our partners, our supply chain, and we've got, for example, an exhibit in our purchasing contract that rewards those who are in that journey to net zero. And so we're taking intentional decisions and tracking and measuring along the way. And I think if organizations in the top 1,000 do it, I think you will see some great outcomes coming out of it. But it's a step in the right direction, which is very, very foundational, in my opinion.
Definitely. We all need to do this together. That's true. Ms. Vishali, I'd like to get your perspective here. How do you think organizations can strategize better to actually lower their own carbon footprint and also contribute to the country's net zero journey?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ruchira. Actually, I also wanted to come in on a comment Sundar made. I just want to say that, when customers do better, I think, folks, whether you call them vendors or their partners, do even better. And so do, stakeholders in the supply chain. I think sustainability really doesn't have any boundaries as we speak, and we're all working together. And when we look at how organizations can strategize better, I just come to the bigger picture that, first of all, there has to be commitment, there has to be a vision and a mission which is deeply entrenched in wanting to give back more than what we're taking from the planet. And I know one of my co-panelists mentioned that, and I think we are also very committed to that. And then, of course, just to give you a sense that we generate about 1.8% of India's electricity and remove about 0.5% of emissions. So that is just a small metric, seems like a small metric, but in a country like India, it's pretty significant. We also have to work together to ensure that we are not only looking at ourselves, but also looking at, the larger ecosystem. So scope 3 is very critical, and how we do it, and the quality of engagement and the quality of reporting all adds up. Because, if we cannot measure what we are doing, we should just assume it's not being done. And so we are living in this world of, some of us, and I wouldn't say anybody on the panel, but there is a trend towards making a lot of statements and we're looking at sustainability as a marketing tool. But really, we need to be committed. We need to be committed within our organizations, and more importantly, to work on the larger ecosystem. I think once we do that, not only and the onus is on some of the large players like us sitting here. As I said, AWS is driving this. It's also encouraging companies like us, which is also one of the leading renewable energy companies, not only in India but in the world, to make commitments and to stretch our boundaries as well, and our supply chain as well. So I just believe that, we just need to come together and commit to a low carbon way of existing. And as we do that, we have to engage the various stakeholders in the value chain, just not what we're doing, but what our strategy should really be about, how we can help others and how we can give back more than what we're taking away from the planet. Once we have that as a mission, I'm quite sure we'll all do better at different levels.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing those insights. Coming to you, Mr. Ramnath, clearly sustainability, as all the panelists mentioned, is emerging as a board level priority in most organizations. But what is your insight here on the recent ESG related regulations by SEBI? And do you think they have a big role to play in this? And what, according to you, are the other drivers in more and more organizations awakening to the need of the hour?
Yeah, I'll actually answer that in two parts. I'll answer the second bit first, because I think that's in line with what Vaishali just mentioned, what Sundar mentioned earlier, because uh, the very idea of the disclosures and the BRSR and the SEBI direction is to actually increase both the breadth as well as the depth of disclosure, which is very, very critical. We, from a purely selfish perspective, of course, it's important for us to get information on as many companies in the ecosystem possible because they form a part of our supply chains. And for us to achieve our Scope 3 targets, obviously, it's in our interest that the larger ecosystem reports on this. But if you look at the the overall percentage of the companies which are part of the entire supply chain within India, where they're reporting, is still very, very low. So I think it's a great start. There is a lot more to be done. And when it comes to board level decisions on ESG, I think what this is probably is just shifted the, I would say, baseline. So what we considered as good to do has now become mandatory. So I think that's one of the really critical things that has come out over the last few years, is that once it becomes regulatory requirement, once it becomes mandatory, it's a certain minimum guidelines are set. So beyond that, what board level committees on ESG are really looking at, and why it's becoming more of an interest for them and for investors and for other stakeholders, is that in very simple language, being strong on ESG is just a de-risking mechanism. It's how you reduce your risk. If you look at global indices such as the Dow Jones Sustainability Index or the Morgan Stanley Capital Index, the MSCI, or other such indices, even the London Stock Exchange has one, which compares the performance of strong ESG-focused companies with the other companies. There is a clear trend emerging that the companies focused on ESG are proving to be more attractive to investors and hence are being more profitable over the last 10, 15 years. So there is a very clear trend emerging that not only does ESG, not only ESG is important for the planet, but it's a very, very smart business decision to take, because it's pure and simple terms, it's de-risking the business for the future. So I think that is one of the biggest reasons why it's become almost, I would say, 50% of the time spent by investors on discussions is on ESG topics. So I think that's very critical. But one point I'd like to add is, since we're speaking about ESG and most of the discussion right now has been on climate, I think it's very important to understand ESG is much bigger than just that. So while we speak about the climate change and the impact of emissions, it's very important to understand things such as water, things such as biodiversity, things such as social impact, human rights in the value chain. All of these have to be a very, very critical part of the overall ESG, I would say, pack, rather than just looking at climate change in isolation, because each of these is interlinked. That is very critical. And you're seeing discussions on this and decisions on this, and this becoming a part of fundamental corporate strategy in the boardroom. This is becoming more and more evident, not just in the top, say, 100, 200 companies, but in the other ones as well. So I think more power to such regulation and such disclosures and requirements. I hope it gets even deeper and broader in the future.
Definitely, that is the way we need to all take. As organizations, we all need to come together. But bringing you in, Renika, how will SEBI's latest ESG guidelines impact your industry? And do you plan to reinvent your strategies or approach in light of this, the latest guidelines?
Well, Richard, I would just talk about in terms of what my co-panelists have been talking about. And one thing which I picked up over here is definitely true. When we talk about the biggest stakeholder for us is planet, and that's really, really critical and very important. When we're talking about BRS, the business responsibility, social sustainability reporting that's been introduced by SEBI, I think to some extent, when you look back, BRR, which was business responsibility reporting, was a precursor to that. So when you look at the entire tire industry, I would say that's not something absolutely new, but every organization has been at a different level of reporting. Coming back to what we've been doing in Apollo, it's something that we've already been aware of, and we've been working in this space for the last 10, 11 years rather, in terms of sustainability reporting. The difference from previous to now is, of course, the the depth and the width of the disclosures that's required, because apparently, if you look at BRSR, there are about 104 different kind of indicators where an organization is required to report. Whilst for Apollo, we've been working on this for the last few years. We have this ISO 26000 framework on social responsibility, which is a bottoms-up approach that we've built up. Whilst we're talking about sustainability strategy, I would just like to highlight that's something we have already embarked on this journey a while ago, where we have 6 pillars which actually cover the whole ESG ambit. So there is governance, where we have a sustainability committee reporting into the board, where we have different kind of a different level, below that committees as well, which take forward the work that needs to be done. Then we do have the other particular pillars. We have climate change. There is the other one, which is circular economy, which is very, very essential for a tire industry, because obviously with the EPR legislation coming up in India and overseas, it's already there. Then we have value chain, which is, I already spoke about earlier, where we've already spoken about the scope 3 emissions or the value chain emissions, which is very critical for us as an organization. People, where we've again, Vishali and other co-panelists spoke about the culture building in terms of how we take it forward. So that's really, really critical for us. And then there is community development, because CSR is also a part of the overall ambit of sustainability. So whilst we embrace this, we look at it as something not reinventing, but reviewing what we currently have. And if there are any gaps, we can actually plug those. So that's something actually it's challenging in some ways, but it's actually really it's great, because it allows us to continue onto the path that we already embarked upon a few years ago.
Sure. Great. Thank you for sharing those insights. Coming to you, Mr. Anirban, your sustainability framework is also based on 3 crucial pillars. So do you also intend to, revisit the plan or relook at it and enhance it maybe based on the SEBI ESG related guidelines?
Sustainability, as you know, is an evolving field. So evolution of the framework is something that's likely to happen. We never did think that this was cast in stone. It was like version 1, version 2 will come along. But let's just take a step back. There are, every organization understands today that something needs to be done in sustainability or ESG, whatever you wish to call it. But a very common question is, what do we do? Where do we get started? And this is where the guidelines like BRSR help. Every statement is like, here is something you can do. Here is something you should be doing. Here is something you should be looking at if you were to be progressing on your journey to sustainability.
Sure.
Actually, sustainability, ESG, they are all means. Why are we doing this? We are doing this at one level to make sure that all of us remain comfortable in our lives on the planet. But from a business perspective, we are doing this to enhance the likelihood of resilience of the business, so that the business is able to handle future turbulence better. The business is prepared for the situations thrown up by climate change. The business is prepared for all the technological changes that are happening in every single industry. That's why we are doing ESG and sustainability, to ensure when we say sustainability for the business, we are really saying resilience for the business. And having a framework that enables that helps. And the framework, as you alluded to in your question, must not be cast in stone. It must be ready for evolution as more learning comes about.
Definitely. Very well pointed out. Sustainability is an evolving field, and we need to keep, moving the goalpost and evolving as we speak. Mr. Sundar, coming to you next. Whenever we talk about sustainability, of course, we're also talking about leveraging new age technologies, emerging technologies, to achieve our goals. So what is your perspective? Do you think the trend of leveraging cloud for the same will see an uptick in the coming years?
Yeah, definitely. I think there are 2 or 3 things here, right? I think first is people running analytical dashboards and so on. That's been there for decades now. that in itself is not new. But I think what sustainability has brought about is complexity on three additional dimensions, which wasn't quite as much when you didn't have sustainability goals to be tracked. I think first is, as Renika mentioned, it's across the value chain, right? It's not just your organization. Usually, in most of these analytics projects that we used to get involved in a decade ago, it used to be about a given company and its data, and not about, let's say, what happens upstream or downstream. It used to be typically one company. So now the fact that we have to integrate data from so many different entities, upstream and downstream, that adds one level of complexity. The second level of complexity comes from the variety of sources from where you need to collect data. Now, some of it would be from equipment which is ancient, where you can't just go like that and say, okay, I'm going to start picking up data about power consumption or wear and tear or emissions. Very often, retrofitting is difficult. Data is in different formats. If, for example, you are running a pharmaceutical unit and you have volatile organic compounds which could get leaked out, you're going to get hit with a fine at some point, or it could just endanger people living nearby. So you don't have the luxury of saying, okay, I'll look at a dashboard at the end of the day and then figure out what I want to fix. It has to be done in absolute real time because some of these things have serious health implications and so on. So these three dimensions add considerable complexity, and that's why cloud becomes so much more important. Could these be done without cloud? Yes, in an ideal world, maybe yes. But the reality is the pace at which you need to collect data, the volumes of data that needs to be collated, the kind of response times that you need, the kind of variety that you need to handle, and the kind of tools that you need for analyzing all of this data. And very often you may not have all those capabilities in-house. You may need to, for example, work with the startups which have built some technology which can be reused with some changes for your requirement. And most of these startups are already running on top of the cloud. In fact, I can't think of any startup, serious startup, which is not running on the cloud already. So to be able to take care of that ecosystem, which is what I think Vaishali was also referring to earlier. So it's not just about you, but working with a broader ecosystem. If you need to be able to do that, both in terms of your business partners as well as bringing in these startups and so on, cloud is almost an inevitable choice, which is why today we are seeing a lot of the very large projects of this nature which are being taken up. People like Lynx, for example, which is an offshoot of Carrier Aircon, which is helping to minimize food wastage in the cold supply chain movement of foods to reduce wastage. It's virtually impossible to do it without the cloud today, I would say.
Definitely. Mr. Ramnath, would you like to add something here? How are you leveraging advanced technologies to measure carbon emissions and footprints? And do you think it has enabled you to make better, more insight-based decisions?
I think we're at a very interesting space when it comes to the utilization of technology for solving for climate change. To be very honest, in terms of the technology to capture data on emissions, it's not really very high-end technology that is very required, because at the end of the day, it's just a conversion factor. You're converting your energy usage or water usage and other usage numbers into emissions or other data using conversion factors. Where the real challenge lies is right now when we look at things like scope 3 emissions. Why I say this is currently we do not have granular data up to the supplier level on, say, things like raw materials, which for a company like Godrej, of course, forms a large part of our scope 3 emissions. So for me to be able to get that level of granular data on a supplier level and not just on a material level, that is where we really expect technology to help us do that. There are already several solutions which are piloting in the market, which are working on a limited scope or a limited supply chain and try to solve this problem. But I think if we can utilize, in terms of not just sensor technology, but even some sort of intelligence to be able to really get down or to be able to pour through different sustainability reports or IRs and really get environmental information which can feed seamlessly into the supply chain data of other companies which are there in the value chain, I think that would be extremely useful. From a pure practical perspective, the other really important aspect for us is integration of various platforms, because with greater amount of data and with the number of different platforms, one for manufacturing, one for sustainability, one for, say, reporting on risk, and another for reporting on, say, safety, what we need is some sort of a common integration platform where we're able to bring all this information together, because the sheer volume of data that we're going to be dealing with, particularly when we start looking outside of our operations and in the entire supply chain, and even looking at things like life cycle assessments of our products, it is going to be an enormous exercise, which is not possible through human intervention. So I think that is where we are really looking at advanced technologies to help us. And in the last 6 months, I can already see a tremendous amount of momentum from companies both based in India and abroad on being able to fulfill this particular gap. The BRSR is actually has been a great accelerant for this as well, because more and more companies require a greater amount of information and more granular information. So I think there's a great opportunity here for technology companies, particularly in India, to plug in that gap, not just for industries in India, but around the world, and to develop much more localized data sets as well for us to use. Because currently we are still very dependent on European and American data sets, and we don't have enough information on value chains and supply chains on things like agriculture in India, which is a huge contributor in terms of emissions of water. But we do not have information up to the crop level or the plantation level. This requires a concerted effort from the technology providers, as well as the government, as well as the companies who are in that sector. So I think it's an exciting time, but there's a lot of work to be done in the next few years.
Definitely, very pertinent points made by you, Mr. Ramnath. We are in the right direction, but there is a lot of work to be done. Mr. Shadi, could you share some use cases where you, as a company, have leveraged technologies like cloud, AI, and ML to measure, analyze, process carbon emission data, and achieve better business outcomes which are aligned to your sustainability goals?
Yeah, sure. And Ruchira, I'll kind of extend the question to what we are doing and how we are helping companies who are in this sector where they're using data, AI, etc., to do better. Because we do believe that when we look at the globe, the amount of sort of carbon emissions which are going to come from these activities is pretty significant. And it's going to double. So what we can do there is going to be significant as well. And perhaps I could start with that and say that, companies, as I said, very, very impressed by AWS's strategy. But within our company as well, I think what we are seeing is that there's a huge amount of leverage companies like us can use with respect to the utilization of just devices, sensors, algorithmic programs, etc., and all of the nifty sort of tech stuff to really harness the power of the sun and the wind better. And for us to be able to solve for the problems which are going to happen, because you can monitor better, so you can solve for maintenance and operations better. And just to give you an example, the World Economic Forum recognized us as a lighthouse recently. And they really had to relook at the way they were recognizing lighthouses, because there was no sort of SOP for companies like us which operate out in the open in large wind farms and solar farms. And we did that during COVID times. So that shows the commitment and the importance of being able to use some of these digital techniques and kind of increase efficiencies, etc. We're using some of these programs and tools in areas like robotic cleaning. We are looking at the impact of pollution. Just to take an example from our neighborhood in Delhi, that the efficiencies in solar panels drop significantly because of the pollution we see around October and for most of the year, actually. So we partnered with the academia. We have a Center of Excellence at IIT Delhi to come up with solutions on how we can manage this problem. So these are all real use cases, very local to the areas where we are operating. But we've also partnered with Caltech, which is, all the way across in California, to figure out how can we improve the wakes steering of our wind turbines for better generations, for wind forecast. So it's almost, how we operate, how we monitor, and how we generate clean energy, and how we can do better to use minimal materials and resources to generate a lot more is the essence of what we do. And we work, as I said, not only we have a RED, which is a digital lab in-house. We have multiple centers of excellence across in India and in partnership with global universities. We do believe that at a micro level and a macro level, it's a long-term way of identifying silly problems, which, as Anirban rightly pointed out, just like our sustainability strategies are evolving, and we need to keep them current and keep working on them. Similarly, the solutions are also evolving, and we are working not only within Renew but with other partners and customers to be able to do better together. So
Sure.
these are some of the examples and use cases we are looking at.
Great. We're running out of time, so just quickly coming to two panelists before we wind up. Mr. Anirban, quickly, what are your focus areas for decarbonization in the near future, and how are you intending to leverage technologies like cloud to achieve these goals?
Arun made a passionate case for the cloud. I was wondering, can we operate at all without the cloud today? Everything we seem to do is on the cloud. So maybe that transition has already happened and it's not a conversation anymore. In terms of sustainability, I'm going to look at it from two sides. Ram was talking about technology, the lack of technology being used for reporting. I agree with him, but I believe it's a huge opportunity. Look at it from this lens. We've been discussing the BRSR. There are 134, 183, including the introduction sections, items of data that have to go in. Is there a way to automate the collection of this data? Today, most of it is manual. It is a huge opportunity for IT companies and companies in the business of sensors and so on to try and automate that process. So that's one side. The other side is new climate solutions. Can we have a battery with double the energy density and half the size? If we do, we will solve the renewable energy problem, we'll solve the clean hydrogen problem, we'll solve the electric vehicle problem, and we'll solve it at a pace which we can't even imagine.
Mhm.
And this is just one example. There are many such new climate technologies which we either know of or are on the verge of getting into, which will be required to meet the climate goals by
All right.
2050. So, as a group, we are looking at both very, very actively.
Sure. And Mr. Arun, what is your sustainability vision in the years to come?
Look, I think if you listen to Mark, he'll say business is the greatest platform for change, right? I mean, we do well, we do good, and I think it all starts with from a culture perspective and how you're going to address this. One of the challenges we're seeing is that it's great to talk about culture and values, but do you have people who understand what sustainability is, right? And so if you think about Salesforce, one of the things we're doing is we're trying to reskill our organization and our stakeholder organizations around sustainability. So Trailhead is our platform, for example, that we use for helping people understand Salesforce. Now we're taking that beyond just our core technology, and we're saying, hey, you know what? If you don't know how to think about sustainability, we'll help you. We've got 30 trails today focused on sustainability, right? Everything from creating a sustainable future, how to build development goals, so on and so forth. So we think it's not just important that you talk about it from a culture perspective, value perspective, and set up the kind of goals that you want to get there. Equally important is the talent and making sure that you have people who understand this and are helping you drive towards those goals, which at the end of the day is the impact that we want to create. And look, I think at the end of the day, it all comes down to staying the course. It comes down to making sure you're clear about the commitments you make and how you achieve those commitments.
Sure. Thank you so much for taking us through that. Coming to you quickly, Ms. Renika, what are your vision for the coming years, the next 5 years maybe?
Ruchira, I completely agree with you. Like top technology overall or digitalization, so to speak, with can actually accelerate the growth of sustainability. And here I would talk about when we look at the larger picture. Of course, there is one area where we're looking at accelerating renewable energy roadmap, moving away from fossil fuels, which as an organization we've already started. The other bit is looking at nature-based solutions. So biodiversity conservation is one of our core areas. But more importantly, looking at energy efficiency within, in-house. And here I would talk about one of our particular examples specifically. When you look at tire manufacturing process, mixers is the most energy intensive operation in or the process within the tire manufacturing process. Here in the last few years, what we've done is we have a low-cost IoT plugin, which we've actually put on our and sensors we've put on our mixers, which actually translates, which actually gives moves data to the cloud, where there is some kind of more meaningful reporting that comes out where we can have lots of analyticals in terms of telling us what the machine's talking to us. It gives us about 600 data points in terms of the temperature if the machine door is open and all of the such other indicators, which helps us to do three things. It helps us to review our internal processes and reduce our waste and reduce energy consumption as well. And obviously, it helps us to look at overall reduction in emissions, but also helps us to reorganize our overall supply chain process. So that's something we've already started to look at to reduce our energy and be, in energy consumption and be more energy efficient, because that's what the requirement should be as well, alongside what you're working with. The other thing which we've looked at in terms of the traditional IT spaces where you have servers which consume a lot of energy as well, we looked at that. So currently we started this process of moving from those to the overall cloud system, where recently, our biggest ERP system is being moved to cloud as well, because when you look at in terms of the servers and their functioning, at any given point in time, the maximum efficiency is 40%. So we were very mindful of that as an organization. So that's why where I kept talking about scope 3 emissions, that's really critical for us as an organization. So we've not only looked at raw materials, but we've looked at in terms of how we can actually reduce our emissions in terms of our scope 3 emissions, and how we can start looking at cloud as a solution where the emissions can go down for the entire organization.
All right. Mr. Ramnath, quickly, if you could tell us what are the key areas that you wish to focus on for decarbonization in the coming years, and how are you planning to use the power of cloud and AI and ML to achieve these goals?
Yeah, when it comes to decarbonization, I think we have sort of hit some sort of a saturation level when it comes to what we can do in terms of renewable energy or energy efficiency. In terms of renewable, we'll be at our peak by 2025, where we'll be at 70% renewable energy as a group. In terms of energy efficiency, we are committed to the EP100 global commitments in doubling our energy productivity. And any such improvements in terms of decarbonization from these two areas will be incremental. We're also committed to science-based targets, as I mentioned earlier. So we're reducing our absolute emissions in line with that. But there is also some gap, or sort of like a gap funding of emissions left, which we're looking to fill through sequestration projects. The traditional kind of carbon sequestration through afforestation, of course, is happening, but we're also looking at non-industrial carbon capture solutions, because the larger scale carbon capture does not really work for an industry like ours, because we're not very highly carbon emitting at source. So we're looking at natural climate solutions, which is something Anirban had alluded to earlier, which is using things like microorganisms or algae to convert atmospheric carbon dioxide into usable building blocks for either agriculture or for other industry. So that is something that's going to be a major area of focus for us. In line with that, one of the major areas that we're going to look at is nature and biodiversity as a whole, since we're looking at natural climate solutions and looking at the role that has to play in tying all of it together. Because if you look at preventing things like nature loss and biodiversity loss and land degradation, you will actually see that this actually helps you solve multiple problems on the climate as well as on the water front. So that is going to be a major area of focus for us going forward.
Sure. One last question to you, Mr. Sundar. Clearly, as all the panelists mentioned, that cloud and deep tech are great enablers when it comes to measuring carbon emissions and analyzing important data and then making informed decisions. So could you take us through AWS's role in helping organizations becoming more sustainable and also ensuring that the entire value chain is sustainable?
Yeah, look, I think 2 or 3 things, right? I think first is definitely the ability to collect data and analyze it is a very critical part of this, right? I mean, since Rinika mentioned that we are very proud of the fact that we are partnering with Apollo Tyres in this regard. Today, the curing process that she referred to earlier, currently we've been able to reduce the idling time there by about 50%, thanks to some common solutions. So between us and Apollo Tyres. So those are definitely, the kind of projects that we are being a part of, wherein it's not just getting the data to analyze, but then, as you mentioned, making informed decisions and then being able to act on those to actually reduce the carbon footprint of various processes and so on. So that's one. I think second is in terms of bringing in our partners as well as our professional services teams to help customers who know they want to get there, but they're not quite sure how to get there. to help them chart out a map, a roadmap, if you will, in terms of how to get from point A to point B in the shortest possible time, so that, as Arun rightly put it, the planet being our biggest stakeholder, how do we ensure that we are producing returns for the planet in the shortest possible time? So that's number two. And number three, in which we're also helping, is we're working to support some of the best startups in the country who are working on such spaces. We provide them with technology, we provide them with funding in the form of credits. Somebody had earlier mentioned about how the investor community gets attracted because of seeing that this is smart business. I would add that also applies equally to attracting talent. We are seeing that when people are working on some of these cutting edge projects on cloud to help save the planet, those are the kind of projects that really draw the best talent in the country, in the world. So, people really want to work on such projects. They feel a sense of purpose more than just something to put on a CV. So that is something, again, that we are looking to encourage, whether it be through hackathons, whether it be through going to some of these universities and so on, and speaking about how technology gets used so that we can excite youngsters fairly early in their careers in terms of how they can help to improve the planet. These are some of the areas in which we see AWS playing a significant role in helping to take forward sustainability goals.
Great. Thank you so much, all of you, ladies and gentlemen, for such an enlightening discussion. And clearly, as you all also reiterated, technological innovations are indeed the key to attaining sustainability across sectors, and are going to be, very critical when it comes to new age technologies being leveraged to achieve our goals in the coming future. And also, sustainability is no longer a tick box; it is a very critical investment, which will give competitive advantages in the coming years. So thank you so much for sharing your insights, and thank you all for joining in.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ruchira.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ruchira.
Thank you.
you.